Hi everyone, I'm Alexander Zeitlin, and this is the Lockdown Lecture Series for Beginning Viola, adapted from the Alias Music Introductions course for the classroom setting. This is our final lecture, so normally we start with a quick review of what we did last time, and so last time we talked about bow distribution and how to use that to correctly play rhythms. I gave you guys all the arrow markings for the entire A and B sections. And normally at this point I have all of the fingerings written in and sort of give you guys a chance to check. But this time I will not do that. You guys have been doing this for quite a while, and I think you'll be able to check your fingerings against the scale if you need to. And when I play through it and you guys hear it, and if yours sounds any different, you can circle that note and double check your fingering. Now normally at this point also I would play through what we did last week, but I'm going to save that for later because I'm going to talk about how to approach the next step, which is learning how to play without writing in strings and fingers. So up until now, you've been writing in every single note you've been playing. You know, every time there's a note that's right here, you would write in a D0. And so your eyes have been here, reading letters and numbers. That's not what we're playing. We're playing the notes in the language of music up here. You've been playing a translation. So when you're looking at the numbers down here, you will miss things like articulation markings, like legato markings, staccato markings, accents. You might miss dynamics because you're not looking up there. You're looking at the strings and fingers. So today we're going to approach how to start looking at the notes themselves. So I'm going to use the B sections as an example. Now, you guys, I think, have gotten pretty good at recognizing the sequence of fingerings. You know, if you are playing your scale and all the notes in order, you know, it's C0, C1, C2, C3, and then goes on to the G string, G0, G1, G2, G3, and then so on. And as long as you remember that sequence, you basically, if you know a starting note and the notes move up or down, you can kind of count or figure them out. And the only thing that I find is really helpful to do as you're transitioning is, if I go back to my scale, I look at where all my open strings are. So, for example, A0 is in the space above the staff. D0 is on the second space from the top. G0 is on the bottom space. And C0 is just below the first ledger line right here. So if I remember that, I could maybe just write in where they are. So back to my B sections. I'm going to write in where my open strings are just at the beginning of the staff as like little notes like this. Here's where A0 would be. Here's where D0 would be. Here's where G0 would be right here. And then here's where C0 would be right here. And if you want, you can even write in like A and then D and then so on. So now that I have that, I look at my first note and I go, okay, which open string is it closest to? It's closest to A0 right here. A0 would be right here. So then this would, I just kind of imagine where that would be, and I just look up. Oh, it's one note higher. After A0 comes A1, so this would be A1. Most of the next few notes are nearby. They're almost in stepwise motion. I can count down from A1 to A0, and then this would be D3 on this note right here. And it goes back up to A0, and then A1, and then so on. And then when there's a big jump, like right here, then I would maybe recount, right? I imagine like, oh yeah, my D0 is right here, so this is a D0, right? And then D1, and I can go by stepwise motion again. So that's how you start to approach, kind of like imagine where your open, I like to imagine where the open strings are and just kind of go count by step from there. This way I don't have to like, you know, count all the way from like the bottom notes, C0, C1, C2, C3, all the way up here. I can just imagine the closest open string. Now, as you're practicing, learning how to read notes without strings and fingers written in is almost like learning how to read notes all over again, because you have to just do it all in your head. So when you learn a section originally, you know, before you do any rhythm or bow distribution work, you just play long bows and find your notes. A great first step would be to, when you're doing that the first time, say your strings and fingers out loud. That way you have to think about it. You can't guess. You're calculating every time. So you look at the first note, you go A1, you say it out loud. A1. D3. Up from that is A0. A1. And you'll see if you do that the first time, you're working on a section, the second time you probably won't need to say it out loud anymore. You'll just be able to play it. So those are my helpful hints for reading the notes out loud. Now I am going to play through the entire minuet, and you guys can play along and check your work. All right, so if you can keep up, very good. If not, you'll keep practicing. So here we are, the entire Bach minuet from the beginning. And even if you haven't learned all of it, you can try to play along with some of it. Here we go. All right, if you kept up, congratulations. If not, keep practicing. You'll get it soon. Now, you're basically very, very equipped to handle like almost any beginner piece. There's a couple things you're missing. One I'm actually going to go over as a bonus thing. The other is arrows, figuring out your arrow positions. And that's not something I'm going to cover in this lecture series. That is like several lectures and practices all on their own. It takes a while to kind of understand and get the hang of, and I assume that you can, read music in various clefs. So that is a question for your class teacher, your private teacher. Now's a good time to really be looking at the private teachers, and maybe for your more advanced classmates. Now, I will, however, take a look at one other thing, and that is slurs and articulations. Now, basically, we have three kinds of ways that we can play notes: the articulations, the ways that we can attack the notes. If notes have no markings on them, they're all detached notes. There's an articulation known as détaché, which just means detached notes. But there are two others. There is this marking. It's like actually, I will do it in purple so you guys can see it a little bit better. This is called a legato mark, and it means to connect the notes. All the notes inside that little half circle are connected. Or if I have little dots over or under each of the notes, terrible dot, here we go, dot, dot, that means to disconnect the notes, to play them short and separated. That's called staccato. We're going to take a look at legato, or what we sometimes call slurring the notes. So I'm going to draw slurs for 4 notes at a time. And essentially we're going to play 4 notes on a bow. Here's how I would do it. Like if I have the first 4 notes and I just play them as printed, they just sound detached, just like they're written. It sounds like this. But if I have this legato marking and I play them together on the same bow, it sounds like this. So I changed my fingers, but I kept my bow moving, which connects the notes and makes them very smooth. That is called legato, or sometimes we call that slur, slurring our notes in string playing. So we're going to learn how to play this scale 4 notes per bow, because this will help you guys figure out how to do slurring in your music. It's kind of easy to follow because the notes are already grouped in 4s, but I will demonstrate a little bit of it, and then I will play through it once so you guys can see. So what I recommend when you're practicing this is think about all the notes that are going to be on your slur before you even start. Like kind of say them to yourself. C0, C1, C2, C3. G0, G1, G2, G3. D0, D1, D2, D3. A1, A2, A1, A0. Sorry, there's no A0. Now the next 4, be very careful because you have A0 and then you switch to D3 on the same bow and then D2, D1. Sounds like this. So you see I switched to D3 on the same bow. Switch. Just be careful because every time you switch strings, you're going to want to switch bows too, but sometimes it's on the same bow. So here's what 4 in a bow sounds like all together, and you guys, after you practice it, you can follow along. Now, after you've practiced it and gotten pretty good at that, I challenge you to also try 2 groups of 4 in one bow, 8 notes in a bow. It would sound like this. And you can even go to 16. Excellent practice for bow distribution and working on your left hand control. All right, so we went over learning how to read notes without writing in strings and fingers, and we went over slurs and articulation. So this concludes our entire lecture series. You are basically most of the way through your beginner work. You are almost ready for intermediate work. I would think most beginners would want to tackle one more slightly longer piece, some more advanced slurring, some slightly more advanced rhythm, but I would say at this point you're like 80% of the way through your beginner work and getting ready to study intermediate stuff, which usually means you're playing in higher positions, figuring out your own arrows, adding vibrato, learning more advanced articulations also. So hope you've enjoyed the journey and hope you guys keep it going, keep practicing, and I will see you at some other video lecture series most likely.